When Jesus started in verse 20 saying that except your righteousness exceed that of the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, now He continues to tell us what exactly that means. Open your Bibles if you're not already there. You know that we're studying in the book of Matthew, so you should have Matthew open, but specifically we're still in chapter 5. We're going to be looking at verse 33. But in Matthew chapter 5 and in verse 20, Jesus makes a powerful statement, something that would gain their attention. And He says, "For I say unto you that except your righteousness," you personally, you who are listening here to Jesus, I'm talking to you, brother and sister on the pew, if your righteousness does not exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you shall in no case enter the kingdom of heaven. And so then you've probably heard me say, but let me remind you that He gives us six different traditional teachings, things that they heard quite often. And these things, they had a current understanding. They had a particular perspective of those things. The first one was, "Thou shalt not kill." What does it mean not to kill, and when could I violate that commandment? What about adultery? "Thou shalt not commit adultery." What does it mean? What are the implications here? What is the righteousness that He is talking about? And we learn from killing, "Thou shalt not kill," that Jesus probes even deeper below the surface of murder. It's not just murder, it goes way beyond murder. It goes down to the very origins of murder, which is anger. And also adultery, it goes much further than adultery. It is lust, and it begins with the eyes. And then last week, we noticed that it is also marriage that is important. And so you notice in the first three, there's six. In the first three, He's talking about relationships, killing someone, lusting after someone, and then marriage. These are oriented around your relationships. But these last three are going to be oriented on a more personal level. Notice with me as we read verse 33 through 37 of chapter 5. Jesus says, again, "You have heard that it hath been said by them of old time." You see the formulaic beginning. He keeps repeating this. It is very structured. It's a formula that He repeats. And He says again, this is not the first time. This is number 4. He says again, "You have heard that it hath been said of them of old time, Thou shalt not forswear thyself, but shalt perform unto the Lord thine oaths. But I say unto you, swear not at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is His footstool, neither by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. Neither shalt thou swear by thy head, because thou canst make one hair white or black. But let your communication be yea, yea, and nay, nay. For whatsoever is more than these cometh of evil." We're going to deal with this one first, and then we're going to move on to another retaliation in just a minute. But notice this, in verses 33 through 37, Jesus gives the commandment. This is it is mentioned in the Old Testament about not breaking your oaths to the Lord. Jesus here is not even saying that an oath is inappropriate. What He's saying is they are unnecessary. You really shouldn't have to say, "I'm going to do something, I promise." You shouldn't have to. That doesn't mean that you should refuse to take an oath. That doesn't mean if you're summoned to court and the bailiff brings the Bible out and you're supposed to raise your right hand to tell the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth, that you should refuse to do that. You should just tell the truth. As I mentioned a while ago, though, Jesus is talking more on a personal level, and what He is getting at here is the issue of personal integrity. He is talking about how as you go through life, you shouldn't be one that speaks two different ways. There's people that will say one thing to your face, and then they will say one thing behind your back. Jesus prohibits that kind of behavior. That is not Christian behavior. That is not God-like behavior. Everything that we say, we should be able to say it in front of people, and we should be able to be a person of our word. And so he's beginning here the issue of integrity by reminding them of a commandment. And he mentions that commandment in verse 33. But notice in verses 34 through 36, Jesus is teaching us something about oaths. Notice what he says. But I say unto you, again, a formulaic saying. This is something he's been saying throughout this, all 6 of these examples, and he's going to continue. This is the deeper implications of the commandment. This is where Jesus is starting to teach you. You say, I'm in verse 20 and I don't know. I can't understand. I can't take it all in. I can't absorb what Jesus means when He commands me to say that my righteousness must exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees. Well, here He gives you 6 answers, and here is answer number 4 in verse 34. When Jesus says, but I say unto you, this is what He's giving you the solution. He's giving you the answer to how your righteousness can exceed the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees. Even though we don't have scribes and Pharisees as our neighbors today, it is still, the teaching still applies. And the teaching is very rich and is very challenging. And so notice how He challenges His hearers. He says, but I say unto you, swear not at all. You don't even have to take an oath. And He says, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne. He gives you 4 of these examples of how they had been utilizing oaths. People in that day, and these look pretty familiar with us. We still hear people saying, well, I swear by my family, or I swear on my mother's dead grave, or I swear on this and I swear on that. Listen, you ain't got to do that. Just tell the truth. Be a person of integrity and a person of your word. And so Jesus is teaching us something though here. He is saying neither by heaven, not by the earth, and He gives a reason for each one. What is the reason? Well, overall, now listen to me, overall the reason is you do not have the authority to use heaven or the earth or Jerusalem because you have no authority over those things. Why? How in the world are you going to make a promise and you're going to call on heaven, or you're going to put something on the earth here, a promise on there? What are you going to do if you don't? What are you going to do to the earth? You don't have any authority over the earth. You don't have any authority over heaven. And you don't even have any authority over, the last one is even the hair on your own head. It reminds us, there's a deeper teaching here, is that we don't even have the authority really over our own bodies. Who has the authority over us? God has authority over us. Every breath that you take and every breath that you have over the next second is another act of grace that God has given you. I'm undeserving, I'm unworthy, but God keeps blessing me and giving me another day to live, giving me another breath to take. I don't get to decide when that is. Notice here He says, not by the earth, and He says, for it is His footstool. Who does I skipped heaven. Who does heaven belong to? It belongs to God. That is where God is. He says, for it is God's throne. That's God's domain. So how dare we make an oath and call upon heaven with it, or by the earth, Oh, do we own the earth? No, we don't have authority over the earth. I've not even been everywhere in the earth. I've not even been all the way around the world yet. I haven't seen all of the earth, but I know someone who has. The Creator has. He knows every little nook and cranny of this earth. Do you remember a few years ago there was an airplane that took off from somewhere in Malaysia, and they started flying, and they were in contact with them for something like 5 minutes or something, and they never saw them again, just disappeared. You know where that plane is? God knows where that plane is. God knows what direction it went. But with all of our communication, with all of our computers and ways of tracking things, they lost the plane. They have no idea where it is, but God knows every little inch and just down to the most minute area. God knows every part of this earth. But He also says in verse 35, not by Jerusalem either. That's getting a little. Now, I don't own heaven and I don't own the earth. You see how it's gradually starting to zoom in? My friend, we don't have authority over Jerusalem either. Because Jerusalem, it doesn't belong to the Muslims and it doesn't belong to the Jews. It belongs to God. One day, Jerusalem will be the place where Jesus comes back and where Jesus rules and reigns from a throne in Jerusalem. But notice this, He says, neither shalt thou swear. Well, I thought that I had authority over my own head. Well, here's news to us, we really don't. And I know that a lot of us in here are coloring our hair, and you know what, I'll probably start coloring my hair too. But you can put a hair dye in it, and you can change. Some of us don't have any hair. But we can put hair dye in it all day long, but that doesn't mean that we really have control over the color of our hair. You say, where are you getting this? I'm getting this from verse 36. It says, thou shalt swear, neither shalt thou swear by thy head. Because Jesus says, because thou canst not make one hair white or black. And it may look a different color, but it's really not. And so notice here in verse 37, here's the critical teaching. The critical teaching that He is giving us is our word should be sufficient. You ain't got to give a long story, but I promise I'll do this and da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and you give a whole essay on it. All you got to say is one word, yes. Now He says yea, yea, and nay, nay. And let me tell you why that's there like that, is because Jesus was making this emphatic. When it says in the book of John, for truly, truly, I say unto you, that is for emphasis. And that means yes with an exclamation point, or no with an exclamation point. What do you mean, sir? I mean, yes, I will do it. Or, no, I will not do it. You have it's just say the word. What will you do and what will you not do? And so He's talking about integrity here. And notice in verse 37, the last part of it, He says, for whatsoever is more than these. That essay that you tacked along to the end of it, of how you had to justify your answer and what you would do, and I promise I'll give you 10 chickens and 15 dozen eggs if you'll do this, or if you'll let me do this, or whatever the oath or promise is. Jesus says all that is just unnecessary, and really what it is it comes from the hardness of your heart. It comes because as a result of sin. You know the reason why we have to give so many reasons for what we're going to do is because we're sinners and we've shown in the past that we are untruthful, that we are not reliable, and that we're not dependable like we should. And I know that all of you are honest and people of integrity, but every one of us in here has let someone else down. Let me share with you something that has come to my mind this week as I have prepared for this particular text, and that is sometimes we can make promises that we shouldn't make because you may not be able to keep every promise that you make. Some things are out of our control. We may say, well, I'll do that. I'm going to make a confession right now. I feel so bad, and I know if you're a dad, you probably have done the same thing. Your little boy or little girl will ask you, Dad, will you play with me? Or Dad, will you do this for me? Will you take me over here? And then what happens? You say, oh yeah, I'll do that. I'll do that. And what happens? Something comes up and you're not able to do it. You know what? The better thing to be say, you know what, son, or you know what, daughter? If I can, I will. That's a more integrity. It's a more truthful statement. If the Lord wills, how about that? Lord willing, I will. And so sometimes we need to be careful with our oaths and our promises that we make, that we are people of integrity, and that we have to realize our limitations. Did you notice the limitations there? Don't swear by heaven. Don't swear by the earth. Don't swear by the city of Jerusalem, because we are limited in our authority to make promises, and we shouldn't make promises that we cannot keep. There's even a deeper meaning before we move on to the next one here, is that this reminds us of how sometimes people can play word games, right? Someone will say, after an oath or a promise has been broken, they'll say, well, I didn't say that, I said this. Now you're playing word games. Or I had my fingers crossed behind my back, so it doesn't count, right? Those are silly little word games, and a person of integrity doesn't do those things. But even probing even deeper, not just word games, but sometimes people can play rule games. They can play procedure games. Well, that's not the rules, and we don't do it like that. How about you just do the right thing? All you have to do is do the right thing. When you do the right thing, you are being a person of integrity. You don't have to make the rules up and then penalize someone for not following your rules or playing little word games with people. And I'll be quiet. I'll move on here. I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. But this is the standard of righteousness that Jesus is talking about. Let your eyes drift up to verse 20 one more time and read what Jesus says. He says, for I say unto you that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness. And that means surpass. Go above and beyond the current teaching. May I just stay right here for just a second? Hold that thought. Time out. There's a lot of things that we learn from our culture that rub off on us, and then we apply it to our Christian life. That is exactly what Jesus is talking about. He is saying, when you look at the model of the scribes and the Pharisees, this is what they say. This is how they do it. They think that you can take an oath or make a promise, and you can, if you swear by this or swear by that, or put your hand on this or say that, then it is either binding or non-binding. But Jesus is saying this, but I say unto you, you don't even have to do that. Just be a person of your word. Notice now in verse 38 through 42, and Jesus is going to talk about getting even. That was promises, making promises that we probably shouldn't make, or making promises that we break. And then He's talking about now getting even. Do you like to get even with someone? Don't you like when someone, they hit you? What do you want to do? You want to hit them back, right? I want to hit them back. Well, you know what though? When I hit them back, I want to hit them back harder, because they shouldn't even come at me like that. They left a bruise or a bump, I'm going to knock a tooth out, right? We don't do that. That's not the way God's people are to be. And so, again, notice what he's talking about here. He's talking about on a personal level. Notice what he says in verses 38 through 42, if you'll follow along with me. He says, you have heard, you see that little introduction again, that it hath been said, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you, that ye resist not evil. But whosoever shall smite thee on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if a man will sue thee at the law, and take away thy coat, let him have thy cloak also. And whosoever shall compel thee to go a mile, go with him 2. Give to him that asketh thee, and from him that would borrow of thee, turn not thou away. And so Jesus now, He shifts gears and He's talking about, again, on the personal level. What He quotes is from the law. And there are 3 places that it's found. It's found in Leviticus 24:20, Exodus 21:24, and also Deuteronomy 19:21. This is not some just an unknown, not very insignificant thing. He is talking about something that is very clear in Scripture. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. I've heard many times a little piece of wisdom. If we lived our everyday life based upon this principle, and Jesus is saying you should not live your everyday life on this principle, then there would be a bunch of one-eyed people, a bunch of blind people. There ain't no one eye, there'd be no eyes, and there would be no teeth. We wouldn't need dentists anymore, would we? We wouldn't need a hygienist anymore, wouldn't need an ophthalmologist, wouldn't need to wear glasses, because all of us would be running around with no teeth and no eyes. Because we have all wronged somebody. But I believe in something that Jesus believes in, and that's grace. And that's the illustrator, and also love. And that's what He is illustrating here, is a proper behavior for a righteousness that exceeds the scribes and the Pharisees, is one that exercises grace and love towards others. And so He gives us some illustrations here. And by the way, here's the tough question of the text. And I'm going to attempt to answer it to you. When do things on a personal matter rise to the level of a legal matter? Because here's what's happening. Jesus is saying an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. That is something that God put into as a principle for the courts to dole out punishment to an offender. God believes in a commensurate or equivalent punishment for the crime. In other words, if someone does this, this is the penalty. But if they do this, the penalty is greater. God believes in a punishment matching the crime. But here is what Jesus is saying. Jesus is saying, that is true, but you are not supposed to go around living your life and taking the law into your own hands. When someone comes along and offends me, I don't have to hit them back. Sometimes I will, I'm just going to let that go. I'm going to take the higher road and I'm going to transcend his or her behavior and how they are acting. Now, if they burn my house down, I'm going to go call the sheriff, right? That's a legal matter. But when someone is in Walmart and they hit you with their cart, well, what are you doing? Get off my heels with your cart. I'm not going to turn around and knock them down for that. Oh, excuse me, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to get in your way. You go ahead and pass. You're in a hurry. Those are not legal matters. Those are everyday life personal matters. And what Jesus is saying is, you have taken a legal matter and a legal principle which applies to a legal matter, and now you are living your life based upon that principle. But Jesus says, do not live your life based on that principle. When someone cuts you off on Interstate 630, you don't have to run them off the road for that. That's not the way that a child of God should live. Notice what he says here. He gives you some examples, very interesting examples. And by the way, illustrations / examples. These meet the standard that Jesus is talking about. And we could insert the word give into every one of them. Let me show you here in verse 39, or at the end of verse 39. He says, whosoever shall smite thee on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. If we are to assume that most people are right-handed, I know there's a few lefties. If you are going to be hit on your right hand cheek, it is because you've been backhanded by a right-handed person. And in their culture, that would be more of an insult slap. Now, we don't do that around here. But that would be more of an insult slap than it would be a barroom brawl. Okay? It is more like, how dare you say that about my daughter? And it was a backhand slap. And so a person who's hit would say, I apologize, I shouldn't have said that, I shouldn't have done that. Here, I deserve another one, right? And so these are not people charging into your house and you're supposed to let them come into your house. You're supposed to protect yourself. Those would be where you call 911. We're talking about in your everyday life, on the sidewalk, down Main Street, in Walmart, on the interstate, things like that when you're dealing on a personal level. And so you're supposed to give the other cheek. The second one here in verse 40, you're supposed to give away your outer cloak. If someone it says, if any man will sue thee at the law, and they win the suit, and they take away your inner garment, let him have your jacket as well. And so why would that be important? Because a lot of people back then, they slept outside, and this jacket right here that they wore, it would be used, maybe they could make a tent out of it. The law said, and I'm talking about the Mosaic Law, that you were not allowed, that the courts would never take away a person's cloak. And Jesus is saying this, if you have offended and you've done something wrong and you lose that case, you should not only give the inner garment, but you should also go ahead and offer the outer garment too. If I have wronged anyone, let me make it right. And here the other one is give 2 miles. He says, and whosoever shall compel thee to go a mile, go with him 2. This was often done by a Roman soldier. You remember there was one called Simon Cyrenian, and this is that time of year when the Roman soldier, he compelled Simon, he said, you carry his cross. He was ordered by a Roman soldier to carry the cross of Jesus. And if Simon would have resisted, then he would have been beaten and maybe even crucified. There may have been a 4th cross up there that day. But Simon, he knew that he had to agree to this and do this. And Jesus is saying not only comply with the governmental authorities when they ask you to do something, but go ahead and go the extra mile. Notice in verse 42, give, again, give to him that asketh thee, and for him that would borrow of thee, turn thou not thou away. And so here he's talking about how someone may be on the side of the road and they may be begging for money. Go ahead and give to them if you can. And if someone wants to borrow something, let them borrow something. Be a generous person. Let me close with this. He's talking about here in these 2 examples a life pattern. Not just a one, well, I was good over here on this day. Jesus is talking about a way of life. He's talking about a lifestyle where people will never doubt your integrity. They would never doubt that you would ever play word games or rule games or procedure games or be dishonest. They would never doubt that you're a generous person. This is a pattern of life. That you would always be the one that would be quick to admit your fault and make it right with someone. You would never be someone that would try to cause problems in the community. You would just want to have great personal relationships with people. Let me point something out to you I noticed. Going back to divorce. What does Jesus say in Matthew chapter 23? Matthew chapter 19. He says that divorce is because of the hardness of your heart. It is the result of sin. I'm going to tell you something. There are a lot of people who are divorced, and either one or both parties in that marriage messed up somewhere along the line, and that's why the marriage fell apart. When I say messed up, that's a nice way of saying sin. It's not that God doesn't allow it. He allowed divorce because He knew that we were sinners. God also allowed oaths. You know why? Because He knows we are sinners. He knows that humanity is untruthful. What about laws and about punishment matching the crime? Why did God have to give those punishments? Because He knew that people were going to do wrong to other people, and God cares about the innocent. He cares about those people who are getting hurt. All of these three things that I've mentioned, they are because there is a pattern of sin in humanity that is pervasive. What I mean by that, those is a bunch of fancy words for saying there's a whole bunch of sin out there, and there's a whole bunch of sinners. There's a whole bunch of people that need God's grace, and there's a whole bunch of people that Jesus died for. As we prepare for a song of invitation, our musicians come forward. I'm going to leave you with this. If you have never been saved, today I want you to realize that you are a sinner. But there is an answer, there is a remedy for it. Jesus died for you. He paid the price for you. Every one of us, Jesus has died for all of us. And there is a free gift of salvation available to each of us. Jesus knew that we could not meet this standard of righteousness on our own. And that's why later on the story about Jesus is that He was going to give His life and die for all of us. As we sing, as we stand, have a song.